In this episode, we're going to connect three ideas that beginners often learn separately and then struggle to combine: identity, access, and data protection. In real security design, these are not separate tracks. They form a chain. Identity answers who or what is making a request. Access answers what that identity is allowed to do. Data protection answers how we prevent sensitive information from being exposed even when something goes wrong. Modern environments rely heavily on authentication and multi-factor authentication, MFA, because passwords alone are too easy to steal, guess, reuse, or trick out of people. But MFA is not a magic shield, and authentication is only the first part of the story. If an attacker can successfully authenticate, the next question is what they can reach and what data they can touch. By the end of this episode, you should be able to describe how stronger authentication, smarter access controls, and layered data protection reinforce each other. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start with identity, because identity is the foundation of most security decisions. An identity can represent a person, like an employee, or it can represent a system, like an application that needs to talk to another application. In both cases, the identity is the label the environment uses to decide trust and permissions. Authentication is the act of proving that identity, and it happens every time you sign in or a system validates a connection request. A password is one form of proof, but it is a weak one because it is just something you know, and things you know can be stolen or reused. If a password is the only barrier, then anyone who gets it can become you in the eyes of the system. This is why modern security treats identity as a high-value target and tries to make authentication harder to fake. To understand why passwords struggle, think about how humans use them. People choose passwords that are easier to remember, which can make them easier to guess. People reuse passwords across sites, which allows one breach to lead to another. People fall for phishing, which is not a technical hack so much as a carefully designed trick that convinces a person to hand over credentials. Even strong passwords can be captured if they are typed into a fake login page. Attackers also use automated methods to try common password patterns at scale. None of these problems require an attacker to break encryption. They exploit human behavior and the fact that a single secret is a single point of failure. When you see password-only authentication, you should treat it as a fragile gate. Multi-factor authentication strengthens the gate by requiring more than one type of proof. The core idea is that even if one factor is stolen, the attacker still needs another factor to successfully authenticate. A common model is something you know, something you have, and something you are. Something you know might be a password. Something you have might be a phone-based authenticator app or a hardware token. Something you are might be a biometric, like a fingerprint. The strength comes from mixing categories, because stealing a password does not automatically steal a device or a biometric. This is why MFA is one of the most effective broad improvements organizations can make to reduce account compromise. It does not eliminate attacks, but it makes the most common credential theft methods far less successful. It is also important to learn the difference between strong and weak forms of MFA. Some methods, like one-time codes delivered through text messages, can be better than nothing but can still be vulnerable to certain attacks, such as SIM swapping or interception in specific scenarios. App-based codes and push approvals can be stronger, but they can be abused if users are tricked into approving prompts they did not initiate. Hardware-based methods can provide stronger protection because they are harder to remotely steal and can resist certain forms of phishing. You do not need to memorize the technical details of each method, but you should understand the principle. The factor should be difficult for an attacker to obtain or imitate at scale. Another principle is that user experience matters, because if MFA is too annoying, people will look for workarounds. Good design makes the secure option the easy option. Authentication is only step one, because once someone is authenticated, the system still must decide what they are allowed to do. This is the realm of authorization, which is the process of granting or denying permissions after identity is known. Beginners often mix up these terms, so hold them apart carefully. Authentication proves who you are, while authorization decides what you can access. In a well-designed environment, even a correctly authenticated user should not have unlimited access. Permissions should be granted based on role, job needs, and sensitivity of resources. This is the principle of least privilege, which means users and systems receive only the access necessary to perform their tasks, and no more. Least privilege reduces damage because it limits what a compromised account can do. Modern access design often uses centralized identity providers to manage authentication and authorization consistently. When identity is centralized, policies like MFA requirements, password rules, and sign-in risk checks can be applied across many applications. This helps avoid situations where one weak application becomes the easiest doorway into the environment. Centralization also makes auditing easier because access decisions are based on a shared source of truth about user identities and roles. For beginners, it is enough to understand that organizations try to avoid scattered logins managed separately by each application. A unified identity layer makes security controls more consistent and more visible. It also makes it easier to disable access quickly when someone leaves the organization. Now connect identity and access to data protection, because data is usually the real prize. Attackers may compromise accounts not because they care about logging in, but because they want information, money, or control. Data protection means designing safeguards so that even if an account is compromised, data exposure is limited. One layer is access control itself, ensuring only specific identities can reach specific data. Another layer is classification and labeling of data so the organization knows what is sensitive and what is not. Another layer is encryption, which protects data in transit and at rest. Yet encryption alone is not enough if an attacker can authenticate as a legitimate user and access decrypted data through normal interfaces. This is why data protection must include both technical controls and thoughtful access design. A useful way to see the chain is to imagine a door, a room, and a safe. Authentication is the door lock that checks your identity. Authorization is the decision about which rooms you are allowed to enter. Data protection is the safe inside the room that still protects the valuables even if you are inside the building. If the door lock is weak, attackers walk in. If room access is too broad, attackers wander everywhere. If the safe is missing, attackers can grab valuables easily once they reach them. The best security designs include all three layers, because each layer compensates for weaknesses in the others. That layered mindset prevents over-reliance on any single control. Another modern concept worth understanding is risk-based authentication. Instead of treating every login attempt the same, systems can evaluate context signals such as device reputation, location, time of day, and unusual behavior. If a login attempt looks risky, the system may require stronger verification or block it outright. For example, a login from an unfamiliar country or an unusual device might trigger additional checks. This approach aligns with the zero-trust mindset because it treats trust as conditional. For beginners, the important takeaway is that authentication can be adaptive, not static. Strong systems do not just ask for a password and move on. They look for signs that something is off. You should also recognize that attackers adapt and that MFA changes the attack landscape rather than ending it. When MFA is enforced, attackers may shift toward phishing methods that attempt to capture both the password and the second factor, or they may target session tokens that represent an already authenticated session. They may also focus on social engineering and trick users into approving authentication prompts. This is why user education and clear sign-in prompts matter, and why organizations often prefer phishing-resistant methods when possible. From a beginner perspective, the lesson is that security controls influence attacker behavior, and defenders must anticipate those shifts. The goal is to raise the cost of attack and reduce the number of easy wins. Data protection also includes protecting accounts that are not human, such as service accounts used by applications and automation. These identities can be overlooked because no person logs in interactively, but they often have powerful access to data and systems. If a service account uses a long-lived shared secret and that secret is exposed, an attacker may gain persistent access without triggering typical user-based alarms. Modern environments try to manage these identities carefully, rotate secrets, and limit permissions. They also try to reduce the use of static credentials when possible by using more dynamic trust mechanisms. You do not need to master the mechanics now, but you should remember that identity is not just about people. Anything that can request access can be an identity worth protecting. A common misconception is that adding MFA automatically secures an environment. In reality, MFA must be paired with good authorization, good segmentation, and good data protection practices. If every authenticated user has broad access to shared drives full of sensitive information, then a single compromised account can still lead to major data loss. Another misconception is that encryption alone solves data protection, when in many cases the attacker's goal is to access data through legitimate channels using stolen credentials. That is why least privilege, monitoring, and anomaly detection matter. The strongest posture comes from treating identity as the center of the security model and designing access and data controls around it. When identity is strong, permissions are narrow, and data is protected in layers, the environment becomes much harder to abuse. In conclusion, modern authentication and MFA strengthen identity by making it harder for attackers to impersonate users with stolen passwords. But identity is only the first link in a chain that continues through authorization and ends with protecting the data itself. Strong designs combine MFA with least privilege access, centralized identity policies, risk-based checks, and layered data protections like classification and encryption. They also account for non-human identities that can hold powerful permissions. The decision rule to carry forward is simple. If an attacker successfully authenticates as a legitimate identity, your architecture should still limit what they can reach and how much sensitive data they can access.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.